I don't think I can do this anymore. My dad said to me, then you'll have to quit.
Probably no one would do that. It's very, very courageous.
I had no idea about anything other than the fact that I was just unbelievably determined, and leaving this very successful career when your parents are incredibly proud of you.
A lot of people would kill for that.
I knew my value to the extent that I was like, this isn't enough for me. It was the best feeling in the world. I'd finally found freedom.
How on earth did you go from day to day to day, working, grinding, feeling negative, but then hearing the call and actually taking the action?
This prestige, this money, this everything else, and just leave.
So Helen, every time I hear your story about you quitting law and talking to your dad, I've heard it on a few podcasts now, I actually get goosebumps every single time, even though I know the story. But there's sections of this story that I don't know about. And every time you tell it, you add a different bit of detail. The last bit of detail I heard was the Strand. I was walking down the Strand and I was like, whoa, this adds a new dimension for me. Because the first time you told it, you said you were just walking. And then the second time, it's like I was walking down the Strand. And then you said it was you described the temperature, and I was like, whoa, this adds an extra dimension. I want you to tell that story again, but I want more detail. And I've got some things that, like, gaps that I don't know about this story that I want to know about. So can you just talk me through you walking down the Strand?
Okay, well, so first of all, I don't think you've been paying enough attention to every single podcast episode I've ever been on, Holly, because the first time I ever mentioned that was when I was speaking to Brandon Rankin, trial lawyer at Mayor Brown, on his podcast, Unlawful. And I did mention it was the Strand. The reason I know that is because in the edit of his podcast, it was really funny, but the editor then just put a random picture of the Strand in as like B-roll. And it was brilliant, which I thought was excellent. But actually, to be very, very specific, it wasn't the Strand.
You've changed it. Are you having a laugh? This is throwing me. I wasn't expecting this.
It was, okay, so do you know, I don't know how well you know London, but it was like Blackfriars Bridge. So now it all comes out. I have fabricated the story of it being the Strand. So if you, at Blackfriars Bridge, Blackfriars Station, I used to walk up there every day, and I forget the name of that road, and it reaches a big crossing slightly up the road, which at that point, I believe, is the Strand to your left, and to the right, you've got Ludgate Hill, which leads you up to St Paul's. So I was very close to the Strand. Okay.
I know it.
You know it. I feel like you want all the details so that everybody knows that's exactly where I was walking. I can't remember if I'd stopped off at the Sainsbury's just before that bit of the walk. I probably did. I often used to get a croissant. Often I would get that in Pret, actually, but I did quite like popping into Sainsbury's. Also getting a couple of bananas before work normally, you know, a bit of that fuel for the morning to keep you going. But that morning I just felt shit, really, really shit. I was just really, really fed up. You know, I started out as this really top lawyer. I was at Linklaters. I did a few years there, and I was, you know, I had a great career there. I was a high achiever. I was top of my game. You know, I was doing so well. And I decided to leave there to sort of try out a different firm, to try out different things. I was sort of told that I'd be working on claimant side litigation more, that it was going to be more cut and thrust and exciting cases, more responsibility and all of this kind of stuff, you know. And without going to too much detail of all of that sort of stuff, it just didn't happen for me. It didn't happen. I was only there a few weeks. It wasn't what I had been expecting or wanting, you know. So that's the reality of it. And this kind of threw me into a bit of a state of turmoil, in the sense of, I think with law, I'd always been looking for that thing that made sense to me. That thing where I'd feel like, oh, yes, this is the career for me. It's what I've always dreamed of. I suddenly have found my meaning and my purpose in life. And bit by bit by bit, I slowly realized that I was never going to find that as a lawyer. And that's a big thing to stomach, right? Because at that point you think, oh crap. So now I'm realizing this thing which I'd pinned all of my hopes and dreams on isn't the thing. That's not my purpose. And I think when you're not coming from any place of purpose or any place of meaning, or at least for me, it made every day so difficult. Why am I putting these difficult hours? Why am I putting up with this rubbish? Why am I putting up with that guy being at work? But why am I putting up with all these politics? Whatever it is, like, why am I there? Why am I doing these cases that actually deep down, it's just a job? And the only thing that really got me through at that point was listening to Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul Sundays, which have, incredible podcasts. It has all these amazing thought leaders, spiritual people, religious people, actors, actresses, you name it, they're on there. And they live their lives with purpose and depth and have had these incredible experiences and incredible wisdom. And it was hearing those people's journeys, their voices, which got me through those really dark days, thinking, just how do I feel more connection in a life that felt quite meaningless and disconnected? And at that point, as I walk up the non-strand, the word we don't know, the street we don't know, I was on the phone to my dad and I was just so fed up. And I had reached that point and I just said to him, Dad, I don't think I can do this anymore. And there was this long silence on the phone. Like, it's freezing cold. It's a January morning. For some reason, I hadn't got my earphones in. I can remember because my fingers were freezing off. The phone sort of stuck to the side of my face. Long, long silence. And I never expected this. My dad said to me, then you'll have to quit. And in that moment, it actually makes me quite emotional remembering it. I was just so grateful that I'd finally been given that permission to pack in this incredible career, this prestige, this money, this everything else, and just leave. And I went in that day and I sat at my desk. I wrote my resignation letter and I walked to the senior partner's office. And they were really surprised. I've been doing a really good job. I've been working hard. I'd had enough. And no one could believe when they were asking me, oh, yeah, where is it you're going? Everyone thought I had some big secret and had found a better offer. No one could believe that I had nothing else lined up. For me, it was the best feeling in the world. I'd finally found freedom.
I've got even more goosebumps than I did the other 2 times I heard it. That's crazy, man. You get this like seal of approval from your dad. And before then, did you have any idea that you might do this? Like, did anything inside you say, oh, I just want to quit one day, I just want to leave? Or were you expecting even to actually hand in your notice that day? Like, was it like a random spontaneous thing that you'd said to your dad? Or were you hoping for him to say something that would trigger you to hand in your notice? Basically, what I'm saying is, did you surprise yourself that thing happened that day? Did you wake up that morning thinking something's gonna kick off?
Honestly, no, because that morning felt like so many other mornings, but I think it was fractionally further down the line than other mornings in the sense of how I was feeling. But I'd been feeling like that for so long and I felt so lost. And I can't tell you the disappointment. I had so much hope pinned onto that job of how it was going to be. It was hugely disappointing. But I'll tell you, I think the deepest and most profound decisions we ever make get made on a subconscious level a long time before they're made on a conscious level. So it was a bit like, the only thing I can think of as I say this is, when you hear some really terrible news or something happens, like, when maybe a relationship ends, I think maybe someone dies, but let's pick a relationship ending, and that person says, I don't want to be with you anymore. And in that moment, everything you thought existed suddenly crumbles right in front of your eyes. And in that moment, there's no going back. The world looks different. The world is different. Just in that split second, everything's changed. And maybe you knew on a deeper level the relationship wasn't working or things hadn't been right or whatever. But it's that moment of almost like the shock realization that brings it into consciousness. And I felt that in that moment, there was no going back. There was no way I couldn't quit. It was just like I suddenly saw the writing on the wall. You can't unsee what you've seen. So I think before that point, I hadn't consciously realized it. But once my dad said those words, it was like he had said out loud the thing that was almost unspeakable. And when Dad said that, I was like, wow, I really can quit now. I really can.
I had a very similar thing with leaving law as well, in terms of you say it to yourself and you think it and your subconscious thinks it, and you're like, oh, this is not quite right, and everything. But to make that jump or that step from your own decision, I feel like you kind of doubt yourself, because working in law is a massive career move. You know, you spend years studying, you go through ruthless processes, and you get to the point, especially you, where you've got to the point where you're in a really great position, you're doing a brilliant job, you're in a, you know, a top firm, you're in London. A lot of people would kill for that, and you're just like, this is just not right for me. And I had a similar thing where it was like, until I could have that conversation with someone and have that approval that it was okay to move on, I couldn't fully face it. I couldn't fully, you know, go ahead with the full assurance that everything would be okay without the approval of someone else. And so I completely resonate with what you're saying there. And I think it's so, so powerful when you get that right.
I think so, and I think for me as well, probably on some level, it's really hard to actually say it out loud in this conversation. I hadn't realised it's quite emotional actually, but I think I'd always wanted to make my dad and my parents proud. You know, they'd never pushed me into anything, but I knew how proud it made my dad, me being a lawyer. And so I think for me to hear that he was okay with me quitting at that point. And by the way, for everyone listening, I actually went back in and quit again a few years later. That's a whole lot. That's the second part to it. But for me to hear that from him was it freed me, because I think, you know, I can deal with, look, I don't care that much about status and all those kind of things at the end of the day, I guess, although maybe I do, maybe it's a complicated point. But I think leaving this very successful career when your parents are incredibly proud of you, you know, you've got it all. And I think that's one of the hardest things. I think it's often the pressures that we feel, whether real or imagined, from those around us more than our own pressure in some ways.
So when he said that, what did you say next? Like, what was the conversation after that? What happened next between you?
So it's interesting because that part of the conversation for me is a bit more blurred, because I think of the shock of what happened. You know, the bit I remember is that you can quit, like, you know, you'll have to quit then. I think I then said to him probably something like, I actually no, do you know what's interesting? I can't properly remember. I think I felt that relief, and I think I said like, yeah, okay. And then I think I probably asked him, really, do you really mean that? I'm pretty certain I said that. And I think he then said, well, yes. I mean, I think he realized if I had stuck at it at that point, it would have made me ill. You can't live in that state and survive that without consequences. I never burnt out. I've never suffered from depression or anything like that. Not that I would ever say, you know, anything like that. But I think if you stay in that deeply unhappy state where you're hating life, hating what you have to go through every day, feeling sick to your stomach, feeling stressed out all the time, that has huge consequences, both physically and mentally. And I think my dad saw at that moment I had to leave, you know.
Mm-hmm. So you hand in your notice, everyone's shocked, you leave, and then I know that you go on a yoga retreat in Scotland.
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
So actually, I already had that booked in. I had 1 week booked in at the end of February. And so the reason it was in Scotland, I mean, it was, gosh, absolutely freezing cold. But so there's a particular Buddhist, I don't know what you call them, movement or lineage in the UK, which, I mean, I've been going to their meditations since like the age of 19, 20. Started in Brighton. When I was at Nottingham Uni, sometimes I went then. And then when I was in London, there's the main centre of, you know, the guy had founded. And they used to do retreats. And I'd been, you know, doing retreats for years at various different centres. And there was this really beautiful retreat centre up in Scotland. And it just happened that they had this sort of yoga with meditation week. So I'd signed up to it. And then when I quit, I thought, well, I'll just do 2 back-to-back weeks. So I made it a 2-week trip. So if you like, I was just doing what I'd already planned to do, but extended. So that was why I went to Scotland. Yeah, and I'm really pleased I had that, because actually that was just what I needed at that time. And I think that was probably one of those really deeply pivotal and profound experiences, which then shaped the rest of my future after that point.
It's funny how things turn out. And, you could think back and think, if you didn't quit when you did, you were still going on working and you were in this negative state, this negative mentality, negative energy, and then you went to this yoga retreat, you might not have been in the correct headspace to fully embrace what you learned on that yoga retreat. So it seems like it kind of worked out like that, and it was meant to be like that,
Look, I think everything happens for a reason, and I think we are where we are for a reason. I think everything happened the way it was meant to happen. I think if you're listening to yourself on a soul level closely enough, you don't miss the calls.
Yes.
A lot of people do miss the calls because they're too busy in everyday life. They deny that inner voice. They choose not to listen. They carry on. And I think that's where you end up feeling potentially quite despondent, detached, depressed, like life is meaningless, all these things, because actually you've had to detach yourself from your inner self so much to actually just get through life. And that's tough. I think if you're listening out for the calls, they come, and they come they come at certain times. They're not always expected, but when you get the call, you have to respond. And I got the call. I could feel it. Okay, I literally got the call off my dad, but but I probably could, to be fair, to moan about work. But I think that's the thing. You have to listen out for these moments in life, because that's where you're going to really step into who you're meant to become. I think, all of these things, whether they seem good, bad, whatever, that's all judgment, and that's all done from an ego perspective. But if you're going to become the person you're meant to be in this life, if you're going to shine to your true potential, have a fulfilled and happy life, you have to listen to yourself, trust your intuition, and you have to wait for those calls and then action them when they do come along. Even though it's going to take everything you've got, it's going to take every ounce of courage you've got, but that's the price of following your own path.
That was highly courageous. You suddenly one day being like, right, I got the call, literally. You go in, you type your resignation, you hand it in. I tell you what, not a lot of people would do that. Probably no one would do that. It's very, very courageous. What I want to say is, when I was working in law, and I think a lot of people also can probably resonate with this, there was so much chaos and messiness and like noise going on around me that there was probably no chance that I would be able to take a moment and start hearing these calls. You know, it was only when I actually got some space that I was able to listen to myself, listen to what was going on around me, and fully get to grips with checking my intuition and listening to my gut. How on earth did you go from day to day to day, working, grinding, feeling negative, but then hearing the call and actually taking the action? Because that is something that is quite remarkable, and not many people would be able to do, because they'd be so wrapped up in the negativity they wouldn't be able to be like, right, I've got it, this is my chance, I need to hand it in now.
So the year before that, in the August, towards the end of August, was when I left Linklaters. And then I had pretty much 3 months out between jobs. And I went to the south of Spain. I did a yoga retreat. I went to Italy, and I think went with my parents on holiday there. I'm sure that was that trip. Anyway, then I also went to India with a friend, went there for 3 weeks. And then I started my new job. So I'd had some space and some time there, I guess. And whether I realized it consciously or not, actually, I suppose, had some time for me. And then going into this new role, it was just like it was like being bulldozed. So you go that to being bulldozed to, I remember working horrible hours between Christmas and New Year, being the only one in the office. And when you reach that point, I was just kind of like, I'm not doing this. On the deal I was on, having left the firm I'd left, I wasn't prepared to give what I was giving. So for me, I was just like, no, absolutely not. No. So I think it wasn't like I was caught up in all the busyness of the office and all that kind of stuff. I think at that point, I was so deeply connected to my experience and just this feeling of this is not what I thought I signed up to. It was almost like, I cut the cord pretty soon. I think I'd only been there 8 weeks by the time I handed in resignation. It wasn't like I was so downtrodden or anything that I was like, oh gosh, I have no energy to whatever. It was more the fact that I was just like, are you like, no, just no, just no, because I knew I was better than that.
Yeah.
It's a self-respect thing as well.
It takes a lot of knowing yourself to be able to decide those things, though, because for me, even the stuff you put up with, I think, is quite bad. But you get into this like cycle of just putting up with stuff and bad behavior being normal and stuff. And I don't know.
You know what it's about? It's about knowing your value. And at that point, I knew my value to the extent that I was like, this isn't enough for me. Like, this isn't okay. And you know what? It was from that moment onwards in my law career that I think I just went from strength to strength. And I ended up, as you know, at the firm I ended up at, a making partner in 2.5 years. And I think it came from that no nonsense attitude. After that point, I was having none of it, Holly. None of it. This is how it's going to roll and this is how it's going to be. And I was bloody brilliant at my job. And I took no nonsense and I was confident. People, knew where the boundaries were. I was really good. And I just mean it in the sense of I was good because I knew my value. People can feel that on you. It is tangible. That person who walks into the room, they hold their head high. They know their own worth. You don't mess with that person. If anything, you have more respect for them, even if they're saying no to you.
Yeah.
I think that's what lawyers miss so much. They become so deferential and so subservient, and they have no idea of their own value. A lot of the time, they let people walk all over them, whether it's clients, partners, whatever. That is not what gets you to the top.
Totally. So you quit law twice. So you've been through it twice.
It wasn't as dramatic the second. Well, it was and it wasn't, but it was a different experience.
Yeah. The first was highly dramatic, and the second was a little bit more normal, but still a leap of faith. What happened the second time?
The second time, I was made up to partner the previous year. My psychotherapy studies had come to an end. I was sort of a practicing therapist as my side hustle. In my own usual way, I think I couldn't get any practice work at one of the local sort of therapy charity centres because honestly, giving your time for free is a really difficult thing in the therapy space. It's a bit of a difficult thing, which actually leads to the therapy space being full of quite a lot of like privileged middle class people, because actually you need a lot of money to be able to even go into it. That's a whole thing in itself, which I think is problematic. But anyway, I couldn't get that role. So I just, as I did with my business, set up my own psychotherapy shop, which I was actually allowed to do based on the accreditation I was getting. So as a trainee, I just made my own little like, what do you call them? Flyers. I remember going around Clapham. There's this really cute little picture of me smiling, and I called it Therapy with Helen. And at that time, I bought a new domain. I was so excited. Nobody had therapywithhelen.com. And then I think I started a little Instagram page. This was the early days of me doing anything recorded on Instagram. Actually, oh God, there's quite a funny story there. It was when I started out Therapy with Helen. It was in the pandemic. I was recording all these meditations in the back garden as sorts of like resources people could use, put them on Instagram. And there's this one video, I used to make them really long then because I had no idea about people's attention spans or anything. And I'm there in the garden, my parents' garden, like recording, being all zen and everything. And then I suddenly see out the corner of my eye behind me, my mum walks up the garden path with the washing. In the way she walks sort of like this, And then I sort of broke from this Zen meditation. I was like, Mum, you just ruined my meditation. Literally hit the roof. I had no editor then, so I couldn't edit it. I had to do everything in one take. Editing was not in my repertoire.
Oh my God.
So that was the early days of therapy with Helen. Anyway, and then I got some clients with that, and that was going on the side. I made partner, and then I sort of was thinking, well, actually, I'm ready to leave law now. I'm ready to go. Making partner didn't really mean much to me. It just wasn't my dream. It wasn't it. It was a nice tag to have, and look, I'm grateful for it now. It's helpful for my business to say that I was a partner, and I've experienced that, and that it was an experience, and now I've moved on. So at that point, then I sort of retrained as a coach, and I handed in my notice, and then I left law a few months later because I had my notice period. I didn't have anything like a fully fledged business. I had a couple of ongoing clients, a couple of therapy clients, and I basically had to cut my life down. So I was living like a student in order to survive while I built this business, and I had no idea what running a business was about. I had no idea about sales, no idea about marketing. I had about 1,000 LinkedIn connections, no idea how to do LinkedIn. I had no idea about anything other than the fact that I was just unbelievably determined. And I look back actually, and I can't quite believe what I did, because I think I didn't realize quite how clueless I was. Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
I guess in some way, the naivety of not knowing how much you didn't know did you a lot of favors, because otherwise you probably wouldn't have made that jump. You probably would have been like, oh, I'll wait a bit longer until I know a little bit more, or maybe not quit when you did. What made you actually quit when you actually did, though?
It was time to go. And I think I knew that. It was just, well, what am I hanging on for? A few months extra pay. When there's a dead end. When it's not your future, And I also knew I was at a great age to do the things I was doing. I think at that point, when I actually left, I was 34 years old. Brilliant age to leave one career and set up another one. What's the point in waiting when you know what you want to do? You know that there's a path down there. And also, what was the worst case scenario? I go try something else out, it doesn't work, and I go and work as a lawyer again. Like, honestly, I think we all have this idea that, like, oh my God, the world's going to cave in, you'll never get a job again, whatever. If you are a prestigious lawyer in London with a stellar background and an impeccable CV, do you really think no one's going to employ you again? And people are like, yeah, but you'll have a gap on your CV. No, you don't. You have a year where you tried entrepreneurship and you did some cool things and you've got stories to tell, and it makes you an interesting person. That's not going to go against you. If it does go against you, they're not the people you want to be working with anyway, because they're bloody boring.
Totally.
I think we've got this idea of, oh my gosh, don't take any risks, don't rock the boat, but it's actually like, well, people deeply respect you for doing cool stuff.
Yeah, they totally do. So you mentioned that when you're working in an office in a law job, you're surrounded by the same people every day who think the same things, and you end up by proxy thinking the same things as them. Say someone's listening to this, they don't like their job, they want to get out, they want to leave law potentially. They want to do what you've done, where you've left and you have set up your own business. How do you suggest that they get out of this cycle of being around the same people, hearing the same things, step away from it and do something that they want to do without having the influence and the doubt of other people?
I think you have to take the time to find things in your life that give you energy in a positive way. So for me, as I say, actually, it was weirdly enough the Super Soul Sunday podcast that were my lifeline. My parents were also very supportive to speak to. I also had friends and people with different perspectives outside of work. I knew that meditation was great for me. Retreats were great for me. Yoga was great for me. Start doing the things that are really, really good for you, that give you that positive energy, that help you, fuel your passions. And then from that space, it's going to be easier to think about, what are things that I enjoy? How might I look? Probably someone's not going to come with that magic bullet and say, here's the perfect job on a platter for you. It doesn't really work like that when you're trying to pivot into something completely different. But you have to take those steps towards thinking, or that thing's interesting, that course is interesting to me, that whatever that thing is, start moving in that direction, and the path unfolds with time. If you're really stuck as well, get a coach. Look, you don't need to coach with me. You can go coach with someone else. It doesn't matter. But the point is, coach with somebody who, one, has been through this kind of process themselves, two, understands human psychology and all of that good stuff on a deep level, who can help you get out of your own way, who can help you see other possibilities out there, who can call you out for having limiting beliefs. You need that sometimes. Like I have now, my business coach is absolutely brilliant for this with me. She'll often say, that's just, you're not looking at that in the right way. And that's what I need. Sometimes we need that. If you need a therapist, get a therapist. Like, put the things in place you need to put in place. And I can promise you, when you start to make steps towards creating the right energy space in your life with the right people and some of the right things in it, those voices of the naysayers, or the Kool-Aid that everyone's drinking at work, it's not as powerful anymore, because this helps you to stand in your own power, to know yourself and to know what you really want. But you know what? You're not going to get there if you don't put in the effort. You can't have a victim mentality. You can't expect the world to come to you and just say, oh, poor so-and-so, I'm sorry it's been like this. Here, let me give you this perfect job and this perfect life on a platter. It doesn't work like that, because to become the person you need to become, you have to go on that journey. And that journey is going to test you. That's just the way the world is. So you have to embrace that and step forward. Don't be afraid to try new things.
That was really good, Helen.